They fined me $750 for a garden shed. Not because it was dangerous, not because it violated any building codes. No, because, according to Karen Whitmore, the HOA president, it didn't align with the visual harmony of the community. What it actually didn't align with was her ego. If you're watching this while hiding from your neighborhood group chat or wondering why your mailbox just got cited for being 0.5 inches too short, buckle in. This isn't just about a shed. This is about what happens when someone tries to bully a grieving father and forgets he used to design military-grade infrastructure for a living. My name is Logan Pierce. I moved to Willow Ridge Trails 6 months after losing my wife, Lila, in a highway accident. She was hit by a drunk driver on her way home from our son's school play. Mason, our 9-year-old, had been waiting for her at the curb. We never really recovered. But we were trying. I left my job as a structural engineer, sold our home in the city, and bought a quiet little house at the edge of a planned community, the kind with manicured lawns, identical fences, and an HOA so strict they once mailed someone a violation for having mismatched patio furniture cushions. All I wanted was peace. Mason needed space to heal, and I needed a project to keep my hands busy and my head quiet. So we built a shed together, a simple, pinewood structure in the backyard. It had tools, storage, and a small shelf where Mason kept a photo of his mom. 3 days later, I got the letter. Structure violates HOA visual guidelines. Immediate removal required. Fine, $750. I thought it was a mistake. I thought wrong. Because what I didn't realize then, as I stared at that cold little notice, was that Karen Whitmore wasn't just coming after my shed. She was coming after everything that didn't fit her vision of control. But what she didn't realize was that I build foundations for a living. And I was about to tear hers down. At first, I did what any reasonable person would do. I tried to talk it out. I emailed the HOA. No response. Called the number listed on the violation notice. Straight to voicemail. I even showed up at the community office. Locked, lights off, despite their hours saying, open. When I finally caught one of the board members, a guy named Bruce with a nervous laugh and loafers too clean to have ever touched real grass, he gave me the kind of half apology you only hear from people who are scared of someone above them. I don't really handle enforcement, Logan. That's more Karen's department. Look, maybe just repaint the shed? Or take it down and reapply through the proper design channels? Design channels? This wasn't a luxury guest house. It was a 10 by 12 shed, hand-built by a father and his kid. I was starting to realize that this wasn't about guidelines. It was about control. And Karen Whitmore? She controlled everything. I wouldn't have gotten anywhere if it weren't for Elliot Green. He lived 2 doors down. A quiet man in his 70s with a white beard, faded overalls, and a back porch full of wind chimes. The kind of guy most people overlook. But one morning, as I was measuring the shed again, still clinging to the idea that maybe it was too tall, Elliot walked over with 2 mugs of coffee and an expression that said he'd seen this movie before. You're the shed guy, huh? He said, handing me a mug. Apparently. He chuckled, then sat down on the step beside me like we'd been neighbors for 20 years. I used to build bridges. Civil engineer for the county. Retired now, obviously, but I still know how to read between the lines. And trust me, this isn't about your shed. I looked at him, confused. Then what is it about? He leaned in, lowering his voice. There's a piece of land on the other side of the creek. Behind the walking trail. It was supposed to be a community park when this place was first planned. But the HOA let it rot. Now Karen's trying to buy it, through her landscaping company, and turn it into a private garden center. For profit? For control. She's pitching it to the city as a community beautification initiative, but she'll own the land outright. She's already got backroom approval to rezone it from public green space to mixed-use retail. I stared at him, stunned. What does this have to do with my shed? Elliot sipped his coffee and pointed with his chin toward the back fence. She needs to show compliance momentum in your zone. Your house is one of 8 on this side that back up to that tract. She's been hammering all of you with violations, hoping someone crack and sell. The moment one of you leaves, she's got her buyers lined up. It hit me like a punch to the ribs. The shed wasn't the problem. We were. This little corner of the neighborhood didn't fit Karen's blueprint for expansion. I didn't move here to fight some suburban land baron, I muttered. No one does, Elliot said. But some of us have to. That night, after Mason went to bed, I stood alone in the shed, running my fingers over the shelf where he kept the photo of his mom. I wasn't just going to let this be another place we lost. If Karen wanted to play the long game, she just invited the wrong player. The next morning, I drove straight to the city clerk's office with a fresh notebook, 2 cups of gas station coffee, and a chip on my shoulder. I didn't know exactly what I was looking for, only that if Karen Whitmore was trying to buy land under the radar, it would leave a paper trail. And I'd spent enough time reading blueprints and contract specs in my old life to know that bureaucrats are better at hiding things in plain sight than burying them. After 3 hours and a surprisingly helpful city records assistant named Janice, I found it, tucked into a rezoning request filed by Whitmore Ecoscapes, LLC. A 5-page proposal to revitalize an underutilized green space into a low-impact retail hub focused on sustainable gardening and community education. It sounded harmless, even noble, until you read between the lines. The green space was the overgrown park Elliot had mentioned. The retail hub was a boutique garden center and cafe. And community education? That was marketing fluff to make it easier for Karen to flip the zoning designation from public recreational to private mixed use. But the real kicker came on the last page. Pending approval, property to be acquired through direct cash transaction. Contingent on immediate availability of funds. Translation: the city was open to selling, and fast, but only to someone who could close with liquid capital. No mortgages. No drawn-out negotiations. Karen was ready to pounce. But she wasn't the only one with cash on hand. I needed allies, people who had felt the sting of HOA overreach and wouldn't be afraid to push back. First, I went to Elliot. He didn't hesitate. Count me in. Been waiting 10 years for someone to knock Karen off her self-built pedestal. Then we visited Carmen Rees, owner of Verdant Grove Nursery just outside the neighborhood. A single mom and small business owner, Carmen had lived in Willow Ridge Trails for 6 years before moving just outside the HOA's reach, after Karen fined her for excessive ground clutter in her own backyard, which included her toddler's sandbox and a row of potted herbs. Carmen laughed when I told her what we were planning. I've still got the violation photo of my son's toy truck framed above the cash register, she said. I'm in. And I know a few others who'd love to join. By the end of the week, we had the beginnings of a quiet alliance. Not an angry mob, just a handful of residents who were tired of being pushed around. People with long memories, sharp minds, and nothing left to fear. Meanwhile, I dug deeper into the ownership details of the park. Janice, who by now had become my unofficial partner in research, discovered that the city had listed the property on its silent asset disposition list, which meant it wasn't being advertised publicly but was available to qualified private investors with immediate funds. The price? $285,000. It was more than I had sitting around, but not unreachable. I had sold my old house with equity, and Lila and I had been careful with money. And if there was one thing I knew from the engineering world, it was how to create a shell company and move fast. So I formed Pierceland Holdings, LLC, registered it through a friend's business firm in another county, and began assembling the bid paperwork. But we couldn't make a move yet. If Karen caught wind of it too early, she might outbid us or pull political strings. So we waited. Quietly. Carefully. We met at Elliot's garage at night, or behind Carmen's nursery greenhouse during slow hours. And every time someone got another violation, for paint color, for plant height, for noise during outdoor repairs, our network grew. Karen thought she was weeding out troublemakers. What she didn't see was that we were planting something. And the roots were growing deep. It started with the trash can. Apparently, placing it at the curb 36 minutes too early was now a finable offense. The violation notice was taped to my front door like a scarlet letter, complete with time-stamped photos. Someone had been watching. The next week, it was the grass height. Mine was 1.25 inches above community standard, according to the HOA landscaping audit. That same audit failed to mention that 2 houses down, Karen's own lawn had dandelions tall enough to braid. Then came the noise complaint, filed at 2:43 p.m. on a Saturday, citing excessive hammering sounds coming from my backyard. Mason and I had been fixing a loose panel on the shed roof. The complaint included concern for community tranquility, and a not-so-subtle suggestion that if I couldn't complete home repairs during approved working hours, perhaps I wasn't a good fit for Willow Ridge Trails. The message was clear: you're being watched, and we will make life unbearable. I could have laughed if it wasn't so exhausting. Every day felt like stepping into a petty minefield, where the smallest misstep triggered a fresh round of paper-thin violations. But then it got personal. Mason came home from school quieter than usual. He dropped his backpack at the door, sat at the kitchen counter, and stared at his untouched juice box. "You okay, buddy?" I asked. He nodded slowly, then added, "I can't go to Junior Explorers anymore." My stomach dropped. That was his favorite after-school club: nature walks, team games, pond science. "What? Why not?" He looked down. "Ms. Harper said the HOA told her our family isn't eligible for community-sponsored activities right now, because of our violations." I didn't respond. I couldn't. There was a tightness in my chest I hadn't felt since the funeral. They weren't just coming after me anymore. They were using my son. At the next HOA community meeting, mandatory for all homeowners, I walked in expecting at least some kind of adult conversation. What I got was a performance. Karen stood at the front of the room like a self-appointed monarch. She wore a tailored lavender blazer and the smug smile of someone who'd never once been told no. "As we discussed the importance of maintaining standards," she said, "we must acknowledge that certain residents, particularly newer ones, may not understand the long-standing values of Willow Ridge Trails." She didn't name me. She didn't have to. "There are some," she continued, "who believe they're above the guidelines, who construct unsanctioned structures, who disrupt community peace with noise, clutter, and chaos. And while it is unfortunate, their behavior does affect all of us, especially when it comes to property values." A few people nodded. Most stayed quiet. But I saw it, the flicker of discomfort in some eyes. The realization that Karen wasn't just enforcing rules. She was drawing battle lines. I stood up. "My name's Logan Pierce," I said. "I'm the guy with the shed." A few heads turned. "And I've read the HOA Charter. Section 8.3, Architectural Guidelines. It states that sheds are allowed with reasonable variance. My structure is within size, color, and setback compliance. The only thing I didn't have was Karen's personal approval." She tried to cut me off, but I kept going. "I've also noticed that violations are being selectively enforced. That children are being excluded from community programs. That homeowners are being cited for invisible infractions. So my question is, when did the HOA stop serving the community and start serving Karen Whitmore?" The room was dead silent. Karen smiled tightly. "Mr. Pierce, I suggest you read the section on defamation. We take slander very seriously." I looked around. Truth isn't slander. And with that I sat down. Karen smoothed her notes and moved on to the next agenda item like nothing had happened. But the crack had formed. People had heard. People had seen. The weeds were growing under her perfect lawn. And she didn't even notice. Ever dealt with an HOA that went too far? Hit like if you have, or comment below with your story. For the next 2 weeks, I barely slept. Between late-night calls with lawyers, meetings with escrow officers, and quietly shuffling funds from my investment accounts into Pierceland Holdings LLC, I was threading a needle with surgical precision. One leak, one misstep, and Karen would catch on. And if she did, she'd either outbid me or lean on her City Hall buddies to freeze the sale. But the stars aligned. The City Council approved my offer in a 3-2 vote, quietly, efficiently, and exactly the way Karen had hoped her own deal would go. She didn't know it yet, but the land she'd been circling like a hawk was already mine. The ink had barely dried on the deed when the HOA sent out an announcement. Special Community Forum. Join us for a presentation on the proposed Whitmore Garden Plaza, a revitalization of unused green space into a vibrant community destination. The meeting would be held Saturday afternoon. Karen's big reveal. Her crowning moment. I planned to be there, front and center. That morning, I pressed Mason's shirt, packed a folder full of documents, and slipped the deed into a clear plastic sleeve. I wasn't nervous. I was ready. At exactly 2 p.m., the community hall was buzzing with chatter, folding chairs squeaking, and a professionally printed banner overhead reading, Whitmore Garden Plaza, growing together. Karen stood at the podium like a queen addressing her court. Beside her, an easel displayed glossy concept renderings, fountains, flower beds, a boutique cafe, and, of course, a sign that read, "A Whitmore Signature Space." She cleared her throat. This project will not only beautify our neighborhood, but raise property values and create a lasting legacy for Willow Ridge Trails. Applause. Until I stood up. Sorry to interrupt, I said, but I think we need to talk about the actual owner of that land. Karen blinked, clearly annoyed. Mr. Pierce, this is a community presentation. And I'm a community member, I said, holding up the folder. And the legal owner of the parcel you're discussing. Murmurs rippled through the room. Karen's face strained of color. That land, I continued, walking to the front, was quietly listed by the city as surplus property. It was available to any qualified private buyer. I purchased it 2 weeks ago through Pierceland Holdings, and here's the deed, signed and sealed. I laid it on the table next to her pristine renderings. Dead silence. Karen tried to recover. Even so, the HOA has a vested interest in that space. We'll fight this. You're welcome to try, I said calmly. But since the HOA never had any legal claim to the land, and you yourself presented it as private development, I don't think the court will see it your way. I let that sink in before pulling out a second document. My plans for the property are already filed. No retail. No cafe. No fenced-off plaza. I held up a simple rendering. It showed trees, open fields, shaded benches, and a sign at the entrance that read, Lila's Grove. A community nature space for learning, healing, and growing, in loving memory of Lila Pierce. The room went quiet again, but this time, it felt full. Not tense. Not angry. Moved. For too long, our kids have had nowhere to explore, I said. No place that belongs to everyone. So starting this fall, this land will become a nature learning center, free to all children in the neighborhood. Karen's mouth opened, but no words came. A woman near the back stood up and clapped once. Then again. Others followed. Carmen beamed. Elliot gave me the smallest nod of approval I'd ever seen, which, coming from him, meant everything. Karen grabbed her renderings, crumpled one by accident, and stormed off without a word. I didn't gloat. I didn't smirk. I just looked down at Mason, sitting quietly in the front row. He smiled up at me and whispered, "She thought it was hers." I leaned down and whispered back, "Not anymore. If you think Logan did the right thing, tap the like button and share this with someone who needs to hear it." Karen didn't go down quietly. The very next morning after the Whitmore Garden Plaza reveal imploded, an HOA-wide email went out, bold red header, urgent tone. Community alert, unauthorized land acquisition threatens Willow Ridge development plans. We regret to inform residents that a recent private purchase may impact long-planned improvements to our neighborhood. One individual has taken unilateral action that could lower property values and derail years of strategic planning. It didn't mention my name, but everyone knew who she meant. It didn't mention her failed project either, or that she never disclosed her own financial stake in it. But people weren't buying the spin anymore. By noon, Carmen texted me a screenshot from the community forum. Why is Karen calling this a community plan when it was her private business proposal? My son was denied pool access last summer for rule violations. Now I wonder who else was targeted. We need a real vote. Enough is enough. The cracks were no longer subtle. They were structural. At the next HOA meeting, which Karen tried to convert into a closed session, until Elliot reminded her that wasn't legally allowed, the room was packed. Standing room only. Even folks who usually avoided HOA events showed up, arms crossed, waiting. Karen opened with her usual poise. There has been a misunderstanding regarding the Green Space Project. Misunderstanding? Someone interrupted. You tried to privatize public land and call it a beautification plan. Karen blinked. Excuse me, but I've given 15 years of service to this community. Everything I've done has been to preserve value and maintain standards. I stood. Then explain this, I said, walking to the front and opening a file folder. I handed copies to Elliot and Carmen, then began distributing them down each row. Inside were maps, zoning proposals, ownership transfers, and most importantly, an expense breakdown showing how HOA funds had been used over the last 3 years. Carmen spoke first, holding up her copy. Is this real? $18,000 for consulting fees paid to a company called Green Space Solutions? Elliot nodded grimly. That's a front. It's registered to Karen's cousin in Nevada. I kept going. Over $60,000 in discretionary spending approved without a board vote, all tied to beautification efforts near properties she either owns or is managing for resale. Gasps. Murmurs. Then a raised voice from the back. You fined me $500 for planting sunflowers. But you used HOA money to landscape your flip property on Cypress Lane? Karen's mask slipped. This is a witch hunt, she snapped. This is slander. No, I said, quiet but firm. This is a reckoning. I handed Elliot the final sheet, a formal petition, signed by over 40 homeowners, requesting a vote of no confidence in the current HOA leadership and the scheduling of a special election to reconstitute the board. Elliot stood up and faced the room. I move that we proceed with this petition under Article 14.2 of the HOA Charter, he said clearly. Effective immediately. Dozens of hands went up in support. No hesitation. No fear. Karen's shoulders dropped, just slightly, but enough. She knew it was over. 2 days later, she officially resigned from the HOA, citing hostile community behavior. A few weeks later, the city ethics office opened a quiet inquiry into her financial dealings. No one said it out loud, but we all knew what that meant. By the end of the month, for sale, signs appeared on her lawn. They stayed there for a while. Because word gets around fast in a small neighborhood, and no one was in a hurry to buy the home of the woman who tried to turn a community into her empire. And just like that, the garden of control she'd spent years cultivating withered in a single season. 3 weeks after Karen left Willow Ridge Trails, the neighborhood began to breathe again. The air felt lighter. The tension that had clung to every conversation like static, gone. Kids laughed louder at the bus stop. People waved to one another instead of peeking suspiciously through blinds. And the park, our park, was finally coming to life. I worked with the city to finalize the transition of ownership. I didn't want to profit from it. That land wasn't mine to hoard, it was something sacred now, a second chance. So I transferred the deed back to the city, under one binding condition. The land shall be preserved in perpetuity as a public ecological learning space, with free access to all children and residents of Willow Ridge Trails, regardless of HOA status. It was signed. Stamped. Filed. No one could ever build condos there. No one could pave over memories. Not while I was alive, and not after. We named it Haven Grove. The city provided matching funds for restoration. Carmen donated plants and native seedlings from her nursery. Elliot helped design a low-maintenance irrigation system. Volunteers poured in, some who'd once kept their heads down out of fear, now painting signs, laying mulch, stringing up solar lanterns. Mason planted the first sapling. We held the dedication ceremony on a Saturday morning in early fall. The kind of day Lila would have loved: cool breeze, soft sun, leaves rustling like applause. A carved wooden sign greeted visitors at the gate. Haven Grove. In loving memory of Lila Pierce. For healing. For growth. For everyone. Nearly every resident came. Children ran across the open field, their shoes kicking up the soft smell of pine chips and new grass. Parents stood in small circles, sipping coffee, shaking hands, some meeting properly for the first time in years. No one mentioned Karen. Not directly. But I saw the glances toward the vacant lot at the end of Cypress Lane, the slight shake of heads, the relief in their posture. We'd all survived something. And now, we were planting something better. Near the end of the event, Mason tugged at my sleeve. He'd been helping pass out little seed packets, each one stamped with "Grow something kind." "Dad," he said, watching two of his classmates climb into a willow tunnel, "this feels like home now." I knelt beside him, resting a hand on his shoulder. "It is, buddy. It really is." And for the first time in a long while, I believed it too. Not just because the park was ours. Not because Karen was gone. But because we had rewritten the rules, not by tearing the system down in anger, but by reclaiming it with purpose. Later that week, the newly restructured HOA held its first open meeting under transparent bylaws and term limits. Elliot was elected chair. Carmen took over community engagement. I politely declined any leadership role. I'd had enough of politics for one lifetime. Instead, I focused on the after-school programs at Haven Grove. Mason helped lead the first kids' ecology walk, proudly pointing out the frog pond and the native milkweed patch. That evening, as the sun set over the grove, I stood by the old oak at the center of the field and felt something I hadn't felt in years. Peace. Lila would have laughed. Not at what we built, but at how it started. "All this," I imagined her saying, "over a garden shed?" But maybe that's how change really happens. Not with grand declarations, but with quiet resolve. With people refusing to be pushed out. With one person standing up and others choosing to follow. We planted something in Willow Ridge Trails. And it grew. Not just trees. Trust. Want more stories where the little guy wins? Hit subscribe. New HOA Karen Stories drop every week. In the end, this story isn't really about a shed or a power-hungry HOA president. It's about something much deeper: the quiet strength it takes to stand your ground when no one else will, and the courage to protect what truly matters: family, fairness, and community. It's easy to feel powerless when the rules are weaponized by people in charge. But sometimes, the most powerful thing you can do is stay. To refuse to be pushed out. To plant yourself, like roots in good soil, and grow something better. Logan didn't fight back with anger. He fought back with purpose. He didn't just remove a tyrant, he replaced her influence with something healing. And in doing so, he reminded us that real leadership doesn't control, it serves. So if you're ever told to sit down, or stay quiet, especially by someone who twists rules for their own gain, remember this story. Change doesn't always come with noise. Sometimes it comes from a father and son, rebuilding a broken place, one nail, one tree, and one truth at a time. Because the best revenge isn't destruction. It's rebuilding something no bully can ever take away.